Welcome everyone. Take your seats, please. Watch out for COVID restrictions. Don't touch anyone or anything as you come into the presentation room. We can see them all coming in. We'll just give everyone a little minute or two. We're going to be talking about future-proofing your skill sets, which is quite an exciting topic, and we have a terrific speaker today with us in Jude Walker, or Dr. Jude Walker. And so we'll just give it another 30 seconds as I still see the number increasing of people coming in. Welcome everyone. Don't forget to say hi in the chat. And again, always, if you can put your questions as we go along in the Q&A area, myself, Leonie and Jude will be very happy to answer them. All right, so I think we're ready to go. Welcome everyone, good morning. Welcome to today's Career Catalyst Employability Seminar, brought to you by Study Melbourne and Outcome.life. Today, we're talking about future-proofing your skill sets. My name's Dominic Saporito, but you can call me Dom. I'm the co-founder of Outcome.life, a business that we set up 5 years ago with the specific purpose of assisting international students get job ready. But before I introduce today's exciting guest, today's webinar would not be possible if not for the good folk at Study Melbourne. For those of you new to these webinars, Study Melbourne provides a whole host of amazing services for international students, from legal advice to emotional supports, and initiative like this aimed at helping international students become more employable in your field of study, and perhaps even to start a business. All Study Melbourne services are free of charge and aimed at making the experience for international students studying here in Victoria a better one. So please check out their website for other great services and events. So why are we here today? If anyone needs any more evidence of how quickly the world can change, look no further than how COVID has changed the world in the past 18 months. Reports say that e-commerce has accelerated 5 years in the past 18 months. And while that's a bad thing for retail, online stores and service providers such as picking, packing and shipping have had a bonanza. The caravan industry, for example, is booming with long waits for people buying recreational vehicles. Even us at Outcome.life, it was unthinkable 18 months ago that an internship was not face-to-face. Now we see more than 50% of internships are totally remote. And with no change in the conversion of internships into paid jobs. So what does this mean for students who have signed up for a course and a career 3 or more years ago? How has the world changed, and how might it change even more over the short, medium and long term? Importantly, what can students do to future-proof their own skills? These are all important questions. And lucky for us, we have a very special guest today, Dr. Jude Walker, futurist at Future Work. Jude is a labour market analyst, futurist and demographer, providing insights into the future of work, particularly the introduction of new technologies. Jude works to identify how education, training and employment and economic sectors might work together more effectively to contribute towards a better social and economic outcome in the future. Welcome, Jude. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here.
Excellent. And so how's the future looking for job seekers?
Actually, I'm quite optimistic. It never sounds like that when I'm doing the presentation, but
okay.
I'm actually optimistic about the opportunities that are out there. What we need to do, though, is to make sure that the education system properly supports the realities of the labour market and is preparing people for the genuine opportunities that are out there.
Fantastic. And I came across your work recently in some work that you did with Deakin and Griffith University and the Ford Motor Company. And it's called 100 Jobs of the Future. Amazing study, given that the main stat that I took away from it, that of the 100 jobs of the future, 53 don't even exist yet. What a wonderful opportunity for students looking to get into the job market soon.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems that the education sector faces. You know, we've been trying to vocationally prepare people for work, whereas what we should be doing is to give them the personal capabilities that enable them to transition easily from occupation to occupation and do just-in-time vocational training as they need it.
Wonderful.
When you're trying to prepare people for jobs we don't know anything about, how do you do that? So I'm very good at going into education institutions, telling them everything they're doing wrong, telling them how they could do things better, and then walking out and just leaving them to try and deal with it. So I've got the easy job.
Got it. Got it. And for those of you who are interested, I just posted the link to the 100 jobs of the future. And I would really advise everyone to go and have a really good look at that because it makes for interesting reading. So, Jude, if you'd like to start your presentation, we'd love to hear about what's happening. And as we go through, we'll be highlighting what students can be doing in their own time that's going to assist them to get a job in their field of study or a new field of study in the future. So, so while you're preparing that, it's interesting that all the people that we speak to talk about the fact that sometimes it's more about the work that you do outside of uni that can prepare you for jobs of the future. Let's see if we get an inkling of that during your presentation. Jude, thanks again. Over to you.
Very well. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak, and thank you to all of those of you who have joined us for the presentation. Feel free to send us any questions that you have and we'll do our best to answer them. So I've put my contact details on the front. Don't attempt to look at the website because I still haven't got around to actually getting it completed, but at the end of the presentation, I've put my Twitter and LinkedIn contacts. You have my email contact there as well. So let's get into it. So I want to talk, I'm going to touch on a number of things fairly briefly. The first one is what is a labour market and what are the things we need to be aware of? And the labour market is simply the market where employers and people with skills to sell find each other and work happens. There are two major things that we're finding impact labour markets at every level. The first of them is the new technologies that are being created and the impact that they can have to a greater or lesser degree on existing types of work. And the second one are the structural changes we're seeing in the labour market. So we're seeing a significant drop in full-time employment and a significant rise in casualisation and the rise of what's been called the gig economy, where people have to work a number of different casual jobs to make a decent living. So I'll talk about each of those separately. Then I'm going to use the IT industry just as an example of how you need to be careful when you're trying to do your research in where the jobs are. Then I'm going to talk about the sort of capabilities that I believe are going to be needed in the future. And I'll finish off with some publications which include the 100 jobs of the future and the links to those that I recommend if you really want to drill down into this stuff that you have a look at. So let's have a look at what's happening in the world of work. Now, a number of years ago, probably over 5 years ago now, a couple of Oxford professors, Carl Frey and Michael Osborne, did a study on the American labour market to identify what the impact of new technologies might be. And to be able to make policy, governments need to be able to measure things. And for labour market policy and measurement, the government uses two different types of categories. One are the industry categories, and the other one, so if I talk about retail or manufacturing or health, I'm talking at an industry level. The other one are the occupational levels. And if I talk about nurses and teachers and salespeople and builders and labourers, then I'm talking about occupational levels. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But in the American labour market, there are about 800 specifically differently identified occupations. And Frey and Osborne built an algorithm, and they went through and they tested those occupations and decided which of those were at very high risk of being eliminated or significantly changed, which were at medium and which were at low risk. And they wrote a journal article. At the end of it, they have an appendix which lists all of the ones that are at high risk. And that work is now being taken into the British labour market, some of the European ones, and the Australian labour market. So we have an organisation here called the Committee for Economic Development for Australia, or CEDA. And when Frey and Osborne did their work in America, their estimate was that 48% of occupations in the American labour market were at high risk from automation. Now that's, almost half the jobs in the labour market that are questionable. In Australia, the estimate is that 40% or 5 million jobs are at high risk by 2030. And we're already seeing that. We're seeing situations now where Domino's, the pizza business, is trialling drone delivery of pizzas to doors. We're seeing some of the restaurants where you walk in and you have an iPad on the table and you put in your order via iPad, and you don't see a living person till the meal's brought out from the kitchen for you. And so, those sort of jobs are now getting more compromised. The problem, of course, is that there's been a lot of controversy and debate about the strictness of the algorithm that Frey and Osborne used. And so now there are variations that are coming out. But what we know is that a number of jobs are going to be at high risk. So I've got a link at the bottom here to the Regional Australia Institute in Canberra. I led a national project for them on the future of work in regional areas, and we developed a tool whereby we could look at any particular region, identify what the 3 top recruiting occupations were that were at high risk, and what were the 3 low recruiting occupations that were at high risk. And so it gives you a sense of, in an individual labour market, what are the jobs that are likely to be in danger. So I'm going to come back to this issue of the categories, the occupational and industry categories, a bit later. So the Frey and Osborne work in the appendix at the back, these are a number of the occupations they identified as being at high risk. Now, my niece trained to be a library technician, and I've never been going to tell her that her jobs are near the top of the list. All of these jobs are ones that have repetitive work in them that computers are able to take over. At this stage, we still don't have the sophistication in computers to be able to do very fine manual dexterity jobs. And we certainly have computers that can write books and that can paint, but this doesn't necessarily mean it's good literature or good art. So there are still lots of occupations and industries where that human input is still critically important. So the second one we'll look at is the changes to the structure of the labour market. Now, I was really interested in what the data was showing us about. We keep hearing about this decline in full-time work. It's very difficult to really know the full impact of it because our census, which runs every 5 years and will run again in August this year, is the only really in-depth material we get on what's happening by household as far as education, employment, debt levels, a whole range of other things. And of course that by now, the last census data is already 5 years out of date. So what I did was I went back and I had a look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics data. This was a few years ago. And what I did, this was in 2000, sorry, it was in 2016 I did the study, and went back to 2000, and the number of full-time jobs there I took as being 100%. Then I mapped the change in those for males, females, and the overall workforce through until 2016. And as you can see, there's been a constant decline in full-time jobs for both males and females over that time. And it might not look enormous. I mean, it's gone from 100% to not quite 93%. But when you think about that at a national level, that's an enormous number of full-time jobs that have disappeared. And what we're seeing from a number of different groups, including the Grattan Institute, which is a research think tank in Australia, is the change that that's showing us in the nature of work itself. So we're now seeing estimates that are probably about a third of the workforce is working in non-traditional employment. So that's casual, independent, contract, gig work, and the traditional employment has been full-time and part-time, but there's still been a concurrent reduction in full-time and growth in part-time. So we need to think about the nature of work itself, what that means for how we make a living, what that means for the infrastructure that we need. So if I go into a bank and say, I want to get a mortgage and I've got 5 casual jobs, they're just going to laugh at me. So we need to look at financial structures, we need to look at superannuation structures so that there are some protections for people caught in this situation. And what we see is that the McKinsey Institute at a global level has estimated that there are 4 different types of workers. The first sort are the people like me, consultants who go from job to job, so that's always been gig work, but it's our primary source of income and it's our choice to work that way. There are also people who choose to work that way but only use it as a supplementary income to either a job or welfare of some sort. The 2 groups at the bottom are much more compromised. They're the ones who it becomes their primary source of income, but they have to do it because they can't get full-time jobs. And these final lot are the ones for whom it only gives them a part-time salary, but they have to do it because they've got no other income at all, and they may not even be eligible for welfare. So that's one issue. The other is the graph at the bottom where for many, many, many years, we've only ever talked about unemployment. What we're seeing now is much more of a focus on underemployment. So the people who are working but not getting enough hours, and the people who are underutilised. So these are the ones who might have done a degree or an advanced vocational qualification but can't get work in their area, and so are taking lower level jobs, which pushes the people who would normally have done those down, and those people take the entry level jobs, and that pushes out particularly young people leaving school and trying to get into the labour market. So this is a really critical issue when it comes to governments trying to work out taxation bases, when it comes to people living below the poverty line, so the social welfare issues and crime that goes with that, and health. So these are things that we really need to grapple with in the work of the future. So a couple of the global things you need to be aware of is that there's a huge push at a global level for countries and regions and individual organisations to take up the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So they have developed 17 goals that they believe if they could be implemented by 2030 across the globe, would eradicate poverty, would give us security, financial independence, would give us environmental sustainability, but it requires organisations and countries to commit to them. And what we're finding is that that's happening more and more. And the three that I believe are important for this area are Sustainable Development Goals 4, 8 and 11, and I've got them up here. So, you know, you need to think about how your aspirations and future hopes sit within a framework like that. Now, there are lots of other of the Sustainable Development Goals that are just as important, but I'm looking at it from the point of view of labour markets. So I recommend that people dive into that a bit. If it's something you start to find yourself getting quite passionate about, there's a group called the Global Citizen Movement, where you can actually, as an individual, join in and do your part towards the Sustainable Development Goals. I use these now constantly when I'm working with clients to say, think about using this as a measure and reporting back on it so you can contribute to the national and global levels.
And Jude,
the other thing, sorry, Dom, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just on those sustainable goals, I run a pre-accelerator for international students, and we talk about all the time that if your startup can address one of these issues, it's where the money is.
Yes.
And so even though some students have come to us with different ideas, the application, if you can make it align with one of these sustainable goals, this is where the money is from governments, both local, state and federal. And a lot of international students have been able to get grants to work, to assist in their startups because they have aligned with this, and that all our government authorities out there are very much aligned with these sustainable goals.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it makes sense. And students need to be aware of them. In fact, I actually have a printout of this on my wall here in my study at home, just to remind me of all the sustainable goals and make sure that I'm speaking about them and aligning everyone to them, because that's where the money is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yep. And I think they're brilliant. I think they're visionary. I think they give us all a joint vision towards which to work. And yeah, if we want to take ourselves into the future, then they're absolutely vital. So yeah, you won't get an argument from me, Dom. I think they're perfect.
And the other one is that students are always saying, how can they make a great impression when they're going for jobs, going for interviews, even when they're going for an interview for internships, which are competitive, like you've got to go and interview and get it. I tell you, if a student can go in there and talk about these goals and what the world is trying to do, given that most businesses are moving towards a more sustainable future, I think that is going to put you so far ahead of any other student. It's not funny. So all of you that have got a Mac, you know, take a screenshot of this and study up on them and be aware of them. Thanks, Jude. That's really good.
Just on that point, well, 2 points. The first is that we've been seeing now for a while a suggestion that with this reduction in full-time work, that people start to think about opportunities in entrepreneurship. And that's certainly a possibility. But the other thing we're seeing now starting to come forward is a focus on social entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And that's when these sorts of things really come into their own, where we're looking at something that will make us a living, but that will also contribute to society. So yeah, absolutely. The other thing we need to be aware of when we think about work and learning is that we're now in what's being called Industry 4.0. So I've got a graph here which shows you the changes we've seen in the various industrial revolutions, right from the agricultural revolution in the 1800s, sorry, the 1700s, in the 19th century, the huge rise in the Industrial Revolution and the creation of factories, in the late 60s when computers first became accessible for people. But now what we're seeing is the latest revolution, and partly it's been forced forward by the pandemic, where things like video conferencing are now mainstream. We don't now necessarily think that we have to get face to face to be able to meet. And that's been forced on us, whether we like it or not. But what we're seeing now is this huge growth in the integration of technologies with each other and with education and work more generally. And so, yeah, we've now got fridges that are smart, that can leave you a list of what groceries you need to buy and can order them for you. A whole lot of things like that. Now, I think we're moving through that into an even deeper level, where my belief is that one of the big moves in technology in the future, I mean, we all know about artificial intelligence, but I believe there will be a huge growth in immersive communications. So not just video conferencing, but holograms and virtual reality and augmented reality. And so, you know, I think that there's going to be a big push for those sorts of things, particularly if we end up with a society that's disease averse and starts to get nervous about close contact with other humans, that we can do stuff through technology. And then you've got to worry about what are the social implications of that sort of isolation. So, you know, there's all sorts of ramifications of these sorts of things.
And Jude, on that point, augmented reality, I'm a big fan of. And one of the things that really annoys me is that I can never remember all the international students' names because they're not familiar to us. They're quite tricky. And so I'm really looking forward to Apple bringing to market, it was meant to be this September, their augmented reality glasses that has a little video. And so hopefully they come out next year, or I think it's going to be 2023. But I cannot wait until someone that walks into you know, our office when we're allowed to open it again at 17 Hardware Lane. They walk in and my glasses will take an image of them, compare it to my LinkedIn profile and say, this is Harpreet. And it will come up on my screen. Yeah. And I can stop being rude and not remembering anyone's name, even though I've met them 20 times. Yeah. And so they're the type of things that are going to happen in the future. And that's what I think you're talking about immersive communication, yes. In that there's going to be all of this stuff happening. And again, all of those who want to work in that type of area, especially who have, you know, a background in IT, this is the stuff we want you to be talking about when you're going for interviews, because this is what's going to stand you apart from every other student that's being interviewed for the same roles.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's a couple of things. The reason that those classes have been delayed such a long time is because of the concerns of privacy. There were huge problems with getting legislation that was going to be okay. And it uses the same technology as heads-up displays, which the fighter pilots use, which are now available on a number of vehicles, where instead of having to look away from the road and look down at the gauges, the display actually appears at your eye level on the windscreen. And it's amazing. My last car had it, and it's not disruptive at all. It doesn't distract you from what's going on. It just gives you an immediate awareness of the situation. You know, so I'm going to have to turn right in 500 metres. You know, and there's what's the speed limit? What speed am I doing? So yeah, the technology is quite remarkable, and the glasses, yes, will be very, very handy. I think I'll need them to have my own name showing by the time they come out.
Yeah, but even for students who may struggle at networking events, having conversations with people who can be quite intimidating. Yes. Believe it or not, people say I can be a bit intimidating, Jude. I can't imagine that would ever be the case. But imagine being in a networking event with those classes, and not only my name comes up, but all my interests. Yes. And it might be my birthday in the week or something like that. And these are conversation starters. These are going to help people, you know, looking to break barriers. I think it's going to be extremely exciting, and you know, people need to be aware of it, and they need to get on board with it.
Yeah. When the technology first started being used, there was a video, and I can't think of the Japanese scientist who was in it, but he's very well known. And yeah, he was talking about it, and he said, you know, so you could walk into a party, and of course they had an example of the display coming up on his glasses, and you know, just scanning around the room and the different names and things. And he said, so it's really good because when you walk in, you know who you need to suck up to.
Yes,
So,
correct. Well, always the case.
yeah, all right, let's keep going. All right, so again, if we think about the changing nature of work, there's some really interesting stuff being done by the OECD, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is based in Europe, the World Economic Forum, which is based in Scandinavia. The World Economic Forum is doing a lot of work on what they're calling the reskilling revolution. And so you can see here that they're estimating that by 2030, 1 billion people at a global level will need to be re-educated. And so what we're seeing now is a move towards saying, well, if we've got Industry 4.0, we need Education 4.0 as well. And that's based on a concept of individualised, personalised learning, of learning in all sorts of different places, not just schools, of lifelong learning, and the need for education systems to strongly connect not just to the realities of the labour market, but to changing societal values. And I could do an entire, well, I do an entire other presentation on the issues of the education sector and the problems it faces. So yeah, be aware that the expectation is that in the future, universities and vocational education and training providers will move away from long-term degrees and diplomas and move towards short, sharp, just-in-time qualifications that people can build on to get that longer-term ability to work, but that they're interspersed with work itself. So that you've got the combination of the theoretical learning at the school, and you've got the on-the-job experience, which is absolutely crucial. So we need to think about how Education 4.0 will work, what happens to those people who are doing a 4-year degree, by which time maybe what they learned in the first year is no longer valid because it's out of date, and how do we address those sorts of things?
And at a micro level, Jude, we speak about this with our students all the time, and that is that it's not the responsibility of your university to teach you the latest and greatest software that needs to be applied in your field of study. And the reason for that is that the curriculum for universities is often only reviewed every 5 to 7 years. So it's really up to you to Google contemporary software in your field and learn it and be able to speak about it again in interviews, at networking events, with people in your industry to show that you are thoroughly up to date. And there's fantastic places like Udemy, and most of the software vendors these days have got their own online learning. And again, really encourage students, because if you're not doing it, the person waiting outside to go into the interview next is doing that. And so you've got to be up with the latest and greatest in software. So there's no better example that students need to take initiative of right now than learning the latest and greatest.
Yeah, and I think on that point, there's a lot of move now to big data.
Yep.
And one of the things, again, I believe will explode as part of the Industry 4.0 into Industry 5.0 will be an enormous growth in data visualization software.
Yep.
And I think that that's, you know, when you go for a job interview, the likelihood is if they're not already doing it, they'll be asking you to do a presentation. And if you can give them relevant data in a way that is not only meaningful, but is actually entertaining and interesting, that's a massive plus for people going for work. And it gives a way for people to understand data much more effectively. And as a data person, I'm one of these sad people that sits in a dark room looking at charts and things like that. So I try to learn data visualisation, but I'm getting a bit old for some of that to get through. And I think it's hilarious that I talk about the future of work and new technologies, and I have to bring my granddaughter when I need to do something with my phone.
There you go. But another practical thing for the students listening in is that programs or software like Tableau is essential.
Yes.
And so Tableau, the #1 data visualization tool on the planet, recently purchased by Salesforce for $15 billion. Every student, and I don't care where they come from and what they're studying, needs to know a data visualization tool such as Tableau, as well as Excel and Google Sheets.
Yeah.
And for all you Microsoft lovers out there, there's not just one type of spreadsheet out there, being Excel. You've got to know Google Sheets as well, because many people are using Google Sheets in preference because it's a much easier way to collaborate. So something for the students to think about as well.
Yeah, there's also another big software company doing data visualization, and that's Qlik, Q-L-I-K. I tried to learn Tableau, but I had real trouble because I am an Excel person. That's what I've been trained and just always used by default. And you can't just transfer an Excel spreadsheet into Tableau. You've got to revise how it's done for Tableau to pick it up. And so I had some real difficulty trying to teach myself that, and finding courses on it can be quite problematic as well. But I think, again, I think we see a growth in courses available for those things. So yes, so think about qualifications, but one of the big moves now is for education providers to move to what's being called micro credentials that you can build on over time to build a qualification. So we'll have variety and different options for how we learn in the future. Okay, so I want to come back a bit, we were talking about data. I want to come back a bit to this issue of how governments measure things. And I said to you that there are two different types of measurements. There are industry codes and there are occupational codes. Now, they're both structured in exactly the same way. So they're hierarchical, and the data cascades down from level to level, getting more detailed at each level. So I've got an example here, the Bureau of Stats, the Australian Statistics Agency, Australian Government Agency. They are responsible for delivering and analysing the census, and they're making that data available. And so they have a range of different ways that you can access that as an individual. So if you go to the abs.gov.au website, you sign up with them, you go to the census section, and they have a component called Table Builder, which, you know, they have some preset things. They have community profiles, which include a lot of the census data. But if you want to get your own research, and my recommendation is that you will need more and more and more to do accurate research on what your aspirations are and how realistic they are. And so this is a really good tool. Now, when you're doing research, be very careful about what you're using to do it. So I've used the information technology sector here as an example, and I'm using the industry codes. Now, there are 4 levels at both industry and occupational level. And so at this, what you're seeing on this table, which is the 1-digit level, that's the highest measurable level that an industry can be examined at. So if I talk about retail or manufacturing, I'm talking at a digit 1 level, the highest level there is. Then it will cascade down to the lowest measurable level, which is the digit 4, where we're getting into subsectors of industries. So as an example here, I've used my region, which is the municipalities which wrap around Geelong. And I've got here the 2 different 1-digit level codes that are relevant to the ICT level. So the first one is information, media and telecommunications. and the second one is professional, scientific and technical services. And I'm able to pull that up by geographic area and then get a total for the region. And I can do this for anywhere in Australia. I can do it by individual local government area, I can do it by city, I can do it by region. So that for me, someone like me who does this for a living, is very, very useful.
Wow.
What you need to be careful of here though is if we look at the 1-digit level here that covers that industry, just to let you know, there is no 1-level code for the ICT digital sector because a lot of that's too new. These codes haven't been revised since 2006, and before that it was 96. Hugely expensive job to do because people have to lock themselves into rooms for months and months and months, trying to identify all the brand new industries, all the brand new occupations, and then code them and then change all things like the census data. And so, yes, so we need to, so if I look at my region for these two 1-digit level industries, I've got over 1,000 jobs available. So that sounds really, really promising. However, both of those sectors cover a lot more than just the ICT digital sector. So professional, scientific and technical services tells you right there. It covers all the science areas. It covers engineers. It covers managers. There's a whole range of different occupations that sit within that. So if I go down to the 4-digit level, now I'm able to go through those two 1-digit industry sectors and pull out the codes that are specifically relevant to the ICT digital sector. And you see now we've come from over 9,000 jobs to 1,970. So this is a much more accurate indication of within this region, what are the jobs that are available. So you can see that top one, broadcasting except internet, the NFD is sort of a catch-all group where the sub-industry sectors that are so small that they don't give enough to do an individual measurement are grouped together into a group that's called not further described or developed. So that's sort of the catch-all. So this is broadcasting except for internet, which is big enough on its own. So you can see that in my region, Geelong's the only place you'll find jobs in that subsector. But you can go through then for the area in which you're particularly interested or where you're learning to see what the opportunities are anywhere in Australia for what you want to do. And then you can start to move on from that. So I've sent a copy of the presentation up to Dom and Leonie. And if any of you would like it, I'm very happy for them to distribute it to you so you've got this stuff. All I ask is if you're going to reuse it for any reason, just attribute it where you got it from.
Yep, wonderful.
Okay, let's have a look now. Again, if I'm looking at that technology area, I can look at the jobs of tomorrow, the report that Dom talked about, and their estimate is that 16% of new jobs over the next 3 years will be in the data and AI area, 12% in engineering and cloud computing. And you know, we're talking about the creation of potentially 133 million new jobs globally with a loss of about 75 million. The trouble we're seeing is that governments will very happily throw in a statistic like that and say, so it's not really all that bad. What they don't say, though, is that a lot of those jobs that we're losing are the lower skill, lower qualification jobs. And the jobs that are coming in are high skill, high qualification jobs. And so it's a bit hard to take a 55-year-old bloke who's been driving B doubles for 30 years and retrain them as a traffic automation coordinator. So, you know, we've got to look at how do we move cheerfully to the opportunities available in these new jobs, and remembering that there will also be a lag between these new jobs being created and there being enough demand for education providers to develop and get accredited courses for them, and then to deliver those courses. So again, we need to think about all of those sorts of things. And so, we're already halfway through the period defined in this particular document. So these are, again, I'm really sorry for the quality of this. It hasn't come out very well. But again, if I think about that digital ICT sector, these are the sorts of growth that we're seeing. So you can see right at the very top, artificial intelligence specialists, but we've also got social media assistants, big growth area. There's one of the new occupations which always fascinates me is a social media marketing person. So you can go to one of these people and you can give them your background and your aspirations, and they will develop a personal brand for you, like Coca-Cola and all of those major corporations have, immediately identifiable. Then, what's the visual that represents you as an item that you're trying to sell to people? So again, a whole lot of different types of things on here.
It's interesting, Jude, that if I think about our business, and I've got 30 people around the country now that work in my business, the last 3 people that we put on have been AI people. One of them full-time, 2 interns, and we haven't told them yet, but at least one of them will end up with a full-time job at the end. And so it's interesting that, 10%, I've added 10% onto my business, and they're all AI people, because we know that the future's about data.
Yeah.
So it's really, really interesting. And so,
yes. Sorry, especially if you're talking about big data,
yep.
Because then you need tools like artificial intelligence to be able to accurately analyse that and give you the things. Humanly not possible to be able to go through data sets that massive and do them in a timely manner and in a coherent manner. So as well as all the other applications for AI, just that massive issue of big data is another one. Okay, so a couple of things that
and just having presented.
Keep going.
I was just going to say, just having presented to 126 Victorian farmers, also on behalf of AgVic, it is amazing just how much the agricultural sectors in regional Victoria, and I dare say regional Australia, they don't have these skills and they desperately need them. And so for many international students that are looking to migrate here, this is a wonderful opportunity to get into the regional areas, pick up a few more points for your migration, which of course we want you to do, because we want, smart, young, healthy people to be migrating here. And this area of AI has been ignored in regional Victoria compared to the big cities. And so a wonderful opportunity for international students to participate in that area, which is going to be very, very needed.
Yeah, and agriculture is really interesting because what we're seeing is a decline in farm gate jobs. So people actually physically working on farms, but we're seeing an enormous growth in the wraparound services. So things like using drones to fly over properties and estimate salinity areas. We've got creation of things like electronic fencing, where the animals wear a collar of some sort, and if they get too close to the boundary, it gives them a bit of a warning. If they get closer than that, it gives them a small zap. And so they stay contained without the necessity to be building miles and miles and miles of fencing. So the ag industry is one of the ones that's strangely enough becoming very highly automated and dependent on things like satellite usage, a whole raft of high-tech solutions, things like driverless tractors that you program. I think it was, I don't know if it was Microsoft Glass or one of the big tech companies has created a desk where your display is actually on the desk itself. And so the example they use is a farmer who comes out in the morning, makes a cup of tea, sits down, and then starts to program the work on the farm for the day. So where will the tractors have to be sent? What's the latest satellite imagery telling us about that heavy rainfall? Have we got paddocks that are flooded? Huge raft of things like that. And so farmers themselves need to become much more IT literate because a lot of this stuff's computer-based.
And Leonie, this is probably a good segue into introducing you. Tell us your just very, very brief journey just over the last few months with us.
Yes, so I started working on a farm, riding horses, chasing cows and buffaloes and all that sort of stuff. And then I did a 12 weeks internship with Outcome.life, and now I actually ended up getting a part-time position doing social media marketing for Outcome.life.
And whereabouts do you live, Leonie?
I'm up in the Northern Territory in Darwin.
So just outside Darwin on a farm.
Yes.
And so a blended career in working on the farm, but supplementing your income by doing these, I suppose, new age type work in whatever spare time a farmer has, which is not much, I would have thought, with all the things you need to do. An originally international student from Germany, is that right?
Yes, that is totally correct.
Wonderful. And have I ever seen your resume?
I doubt it. You might have seen my LinkedIn profile.
Okay, that's a little hint too for people. No one cares about your CV. Everyone cares about your LinkedIn profile. So if you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn. So, and thanks for all your wonderful efforts, Leonie. You did such a good job during your internship that we would have been absolute fools not to have employed you for the 20 hours a week that you're allowed to work. So thank you for that. Sorry, Jude, keep going.
Okay, that's okay. And Leonie is a perfect example of, what is a blended career from completely different industry sectors, and that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So one of my major concerns is that we are seeing a decline in the level of creative thinking in young people as well as adults. And you can see here the Torrance test of creative thinking has been around forever. And what it showed that was 98% of kids in kindergarten, preschool, are creative geniuses. So you could give them a bunch of Lego and they could make you a million different things. You could give them a paperclip and they could come up with a dozen different ways you could use it. But by 25, only 3% of those remained as creative geniuses. And the only thing that's happened in between is education. So we are actually teaching our young people out of being able to think creatively. And that's one of the key critical interpersonal capabilities that are needed more and more and more in jobs of the future. So that really concerns me. The other thing is that 86%, or the estimate is 86% of people don't fact check anything they read on social media. They blindly accept whatever they read, and the Trump era was a perfect example of one person making a confident statement that's absolutely untrue, and most of the world starting to go, oh, well, that must be right. He said it. And so we need to think about that critical thinking capacity as well. And I believe they're two of the absolutely key capabilities for the future. So one of the things I did, I got invited to go to Finland a few years ago to speak at an international conference about a new learning model that I developed. And it's built around this issue of thinking capabilities. So creative and critical thinking underpin everything. But I believe that if we can help people learn these 5 different thinking methods, starting with futures thinking, around to systems thinking, to complexity thinking, to entrepreneurial thinking and design thinking, then we can help people address work and personal issues and help them define where they want to be later in life. So futures thinking is about learning the skills of identifying what the possible futures are for you as an individual or your organisation, then thinking about within what system do those futures operate, being able to identify of those futures, which are, if nothing changes, what's the probable future? And if we can vary what happens, what are the possible futures and what is my preferred future? Once I know that, I can start to actively work towards it. And Stephen Covey, who was a management guru in the 80s, or sorry, the 90s, he had a saying that if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And Lewis Carroll is also attributed as having created that saying. So, and that's very true. If you don't have any thought about what your aspirations really are and what the reality is, so what's the system within which they're bedded, how do you know what you need to do? The trouble with systems thinking is that the minute we try to visually map a system, we map it out of reality because we have to simplify it so much. So overlaying that, we need the ability to think about complexity. So we've got a system. What are the connections? That's a basic mind map. But on top of that, are those connections one way or two way? How strong are each of those connections compared to the others? Do we have outliers that aren't strongly connected to anything really in the system? And if so, why are they outliers and are they important? From that, let's think about what our preferred future is. We've understood the systems that are helping us to work towards it and impeding us from getting there. We need to then bring in that entrepreneurial thinking capability to say, all right, what would my niche be? What can my specialist contribution be that makes me attractive to employers? So being able to do that, actually think about yourself as a product and what are the needs of the labour market, and how can I address some of those Dom mentioned earlier about the issue of social enterprises, where we look at how we contribute to things like the Sustainable Development Goals. And from having done that, we can then use design thinking skills to be able to go, okay, so if I have to work within the existing system to get where I want to go, what do I need to do to maximise the opportunities and to minimise the problems? And if I can't work within that, how can I design a completely new system within which I can take this? And that's where we see a lot of these new tech jobs happening. They need new systems because they don't fit neatly into the existing systems. So there's enormous opportunity here if we can help people to develop these thinking capabilities, which are underpinned by the creativity and critical thinking skills that are really necessary for people to be able to go out and instead of just going, all right, throughout my course, and this is one of my big problems with education, we teach people in what's called a convergent manner. So there's one right solution. If we can find that, everything's terrific. But the trouble is the world is very chaotic and messy. So there's not one right solution. Under divergent thinking, we look for the optimum solution for this situation, for this group at this point in time. So it's about drawing on my education, about my experience. It's about drawing on my networks for their knowledge to say, all right, for this organisation or for this group or for me as an individual, this is the issue. Is that really the issue, or is this just a symptom of something different? And what could this group do to do something about that? And so these sort of skills are going to be absolutely crucial because they give you the adaptability to be able to move across industries, because these capabilities are important no matter where you go. So, sorry, this is a great long screen, but it just again talks about the fact that relationships are going to be just as important as vocational skills in the future, and that in the past, I mean, how many of us go to a party and the first question you get asked is, what do you do? So we're identified by our occupation, and if we get retrenched or we retire or we move out of that job for whatever reason, we've lost our identity, and that is quite a traumatic experience. Whereas in the future, the question is more likely to be, who are you? What are your values? What interests you? And from that, the conversation can broaden out. So if you're going for job interviews, think in those sorts of terms. I might have vocational expertise, but what can I bring as a person that differentiates me from other people to this employer in this job? So we're looking at an estimate again from the World Economic Forum that 50% of people are going to need reskilling within the next 4.5 years. That these are a number of the new capabilities that are going to be needed. So again, that last one, creative and innovative mindset, it's about novel and adaptive thinking. So I can sit there as part of a group and my manager can present a problem. Instead of just diving into the traditional, well, instead of actually trying to examine the issue in more depth, I'm going to jump straight to what I think the solution is, or what I know the solution is. Instead of going, okay, so let's get some context for this. Let's talk about, again, is this something deeply entrenched? Is this what is called a wicked problem? How are we going to deal with that? And that emotional and social intelligence will never cease to be important, because the human element is still vitally important in work and in life. So what I've done here again is to give you a list of a number of the different capabilities that have been identified by the World Economic Forum, and they're quite varied. I mean, we've got technology there, but we've also got resilience and reasoning. So there's our critical thinking stuff, leadership, creativity, active learning. So learning by doing and learning by helping others learn. All sorts of things like this, really, really important. You notice there's basically no vocationally specific skills there. And just to finish off, Dom's already talked to you about the Jobs of the Future report. LinkedIn has put out a national report on emerging jobs. You've got the Jobs of the Future. You've got the Jobs of Tomorrow, which is from the World Economic Forum, about Industry 4.0 and the sort of work that's likely to be created. So there's the work ones. And then education. The one on the left terrifies me. This was a study done last year before, by Melbourne University, and they estimate that at any one given time, up to 50,000 young people have not disengaged from school, they have completely disconnected from the entire education system. And so how do we find those young people? How do we help them to navigate to a good future for them? These are people who are potentially going to be on welfare for the rest of their lives, are going to end up stuck in the gig economy, will always live trying to do what's called precarious work. So those gig jobs where I go onto some of those platforms and it's a race to the bottom. People end up underbidding each other just to get the work, to the point where it's not financially viable to do the work. And the one on the right is about education 4.0 and what the schools of the future need to look like. So if you do have an interest in this area, I strongly recommend that you access those reports. I've got the links there for it. And now it's a matter of questions. So I'm sorry that took so long, but I hope that was useful. And that, if you've got anything to ask, please just let us know. So I shall stop sharing my screen so that we can go back. So we don't have any questions listed at the moment, but I haven't looked at the chat to see if there's anything there that would be good to talk about.
Well, thank you, Jude, for that. That was absolutely fantastic. And I tried to preempt what a few of the questions would be. as we went through. So I kind of made comments as we went along, and I had a few people ask me questions directly, and I was able to incorporate that in the discussion. So thank you very much for that. You know, you touch on a lot of things, Jude, that we preach every day to international students, and that is that networking is key, absolutely key. And for students to be doing things outside of their education curriculum. I say to my kids who are both at university, stop studying. When I say that, I don't mean stop studying. I mean, you've got to do other things too. You've got to be volunteering. You've got to be playing sport. You've got to be going to meetups and networking events. You've got to be able to have intelligent conversations with people about the future. That's how you're going to get noticed, and that's how you're going to get jobs come flooding to you, as opposed to sending out hundreds and hundreds of applications to jobs online. It's only 15% of all the jobs available at any point in time anyway. It is a waste of time, and I think people know that. Doing some of the things that we've spoken about today, I think is going to be far more valuable. So without any questions, Jude, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Always lovely to talk to you. Leonie, thank you for helping out today as well. And again, congratulations on your journey too here in Australia. We just got to get that PR now. We'll be helping you as much as we can for that.
Yes, thank you, Dom.
And thanks everyone for joining us. And I'm not sure what our next one is, but being registered, you will be getting information on that in your inbox. So we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks very much.
Bye.
See you later. Thanks.
See ya. Thank you.